All right, unclassified, committee sensitive, redacted, executive session, permanent select committee on intelligence, U.S. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Interview of Yared Tamene Wold Johannes, Wednesday, August 30th, 2017, Washington, D.C. The interview in the above matter was held in room HVC 304, the Capitol, commencing at 2:08 p.m. So some of this is clearly redacted. For Yared Tamene Wold Johannes, see Mark Eric Elias, Graham Wilson, Perkins, COIE, Political Law Group, 700 13th Street NW, Suite 600, Washington, D.C. 20005. All right. Well, good afternoon now. This is a transcribed interview of Mr. Yared Tamene. Thank you for speaking to us today. For the record, I am, blank, attorney with the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence with the majority. And also here is blank blank also with the majority staff, blank blank with the minority staff, blank. Before we begin, Mr. Tamene, I just want to say a few things for the record. The questioning will be conducted by staff, as you see here. During the course of this interview, we may ask questions during our allotted time period, should we choose to do so. Some questions may seem basic, but that is because we need to clearly establish facts and the underlying situation. Do not assume we know any facts you have previously disclosed as part of any other investigation or review. During the course of this interview, we'll take any breaks that you desire. There is a reporter making a record of these proceedings, so we can easily consult a written compilation of your answers later. We ask that you give complete and fulsome replies to questions based on your best recollections. This interview will be at the unclassified level. If a question is unclear or you are uncertain in your response, please let us know. If you do not know the answer to a question or cannot remember, simply say so. You are entitled to have counsel present for this interview, and you have brought them here with you. For the record, if you can please make your appearances. Mr. Elias. Mark Elias from the law firm of Perkins, COIE. Mr. Wilson. Graham Wilson from Perkins Cole. Mr. Elias. And that's COIE. Blank, thank you. As I said, the interview will be transcribed, and because the reporter cannot record gestures, we ask that you answer verbally to everything. If you forget to do this, you might be reminded to do so. You may also be asked to spell certain terms or unusual phrases. Consistent with the committee's rules of procedure, you and your counsel, collectively or individually, will have a reasonable opportunity to inspect the transcript of this interview in order to determine whether your answers were correctly transcribed. The transcript will remain in the committee's custody. The committee also reserves the right to request your return for additional questions should the need arise. The process for the interview is as follows. The majority will be given 40 minutes to ask questions, followed by the minority for 40 minutes to ask questions. We can break thereafter shortly if you'd like, and followed by 15 minutes from the majority and 15 minutes from the minority again. These time limits will be strictly adhered to by all sides, and there will be no extensions granted. Time will be kept by us, with 5 and 1 minute warnings, respectively, when appropriate. To ensure confidentiality, we ask that you do not discuss the interview with anyone other than your attorneys. Our record today will reflect that you have not been compelled to appear here. You are doing so voluntarily. You are reminded that it is unlawful to deliberately provide false information to members of Congress or staff. Lastly, the record will reflect that, again, you are appearing voluntarily for this interview and will be under oath. Do you understand everything that I have said? Mr. Tamene, yes, I do. Blank. Would you raise your right hand so I can swear you in? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Mr. Tamene, I do. Blank. Thank you, Mr. Tamene. I'll turn it over to my colleague for questioning. Examination by blank. Question. Mr. Tamene, thank you for being here. What I preliminarily would like to do today is sort of walk through the period from approximately September 2015 to April 2016. Before doing that, I would just like to set the stage with a little background information. Currently, what is your job title, roles, and responsibilities as of today? Answer. As of today, I serve as the IT director for the DNC. So that's Democratic National Committee, I guess. Mr. Wilson, one thing before we go further. Yared goes by Yared Tamene. Do you want to give him your full legal name for the record? Mr. Tamene, I'm sorry, my full name is Yared Tamene Wold Johans. That's spelled WOLDE-YOHANNES by blank. Question. So you said IT director for the DNC. Answer, correct. Question. Which is the Democratic National Committee? Answer, correct. Question. And what is your employment relationship with the DNC? Answer. I work under a contract with the DNC. I work for a company called the MIS Department, which stands for the Management Information Systems, Incorporated, and I. There's a contract that exists between the MIS Department and the DNC, and it embeds roles, embeds personnel like myself in the DNC. So one of those embedded roles is the IT director, which I fulfill. Question. And do you know how many people work for the DNC from the MIS department pursuant to this contract? Answer. It varies. There are currently, I believe, 7 personnel, including myself, who serve in various roles within the technology department as a whole. Question. And what are as the IT director for the DNC, what are your primary roles and responsibilities? Answer. Are you asking me that question at present or in the time frame you mentioned at the beginning? Question. First answer right now. Answer. Right now. So my role is, well, I share the IT director role per se now with another individual, and that role has the purview of overseeing the systems engineering team that works on DNC systems and overseeing the help desk team, which is the team charged with supporting staff, like printing issues, installing applications, that kind of stuff. And I would receive staff training for people who start, interns or individuals who start jobs at the DNC. I also oversee the IT budget, manage vendor relationships, and manage the tool sets that are used by various departments within the DNC. Question. And how long have you served as the IT director for the DNC? Answer. January of 2013. And prior to that, the IT director role was split in two. There was an information services role, and there was a systems director role in 2011 and 2012. And I served as the information services director in 2011 and 2012. Question. Since you began your current position in 2013. Answer. Correct. Question. At a high level, how have your roles and responsibilities? You indicated that your roles and responsibilities might have changed or evolved during that time. Can you walk us through that? Answer. Not during that time. Recently, only because I've been sort of preparing for a vacation. And so there's someone covering for me, is what I mean to say. I'm still the IT director at the DNC. Question. And the duties and responsibilities that you described then would have been roughly the duties you were performing. Answer. Correct. Question. In September of 2015. Answer. Correct. Question. And indeed, since you took this position in 2013. Answer. Correct. Question. So in September 2015, my understanding is that the DNC received a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Is that correct? Answer. Yes. There was a phone call from an agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation that was placed to the main DNC switchboard. That call was transferred to the help desk, and a help desk personnel answered and transferred that call to me. And I took that call. And in that conversation with the person on the other line, I was asked if I was able to corroborate, to look into specific activities that the FBI had noticed emanating from the DNC network that could be nefarious, and if I could take a look at our systems to see if I can corroborate that, if I could find any evidence to corroborate their suspicions. Question. How did you respond to this individual? Answer. So after this call, the first thing that I did was start looking with my colleagues as to our firewall logs, our system logs, to see if we can find evidence to corroborate what the person on the phone had said. Question. Which was, what was he telling you that you should be looking for? Answer. He said, I remember specifically he asked for us to look at email. I'm sorry, not email. Web traffic that was hitting a website that ended with / blanked out. That was the only information we had. The agent didn't provide us with timestamps, meaning the date and time as to when the traffic had occurred, or the destination IP address, or the source from whence that traffic was coming. So I informed my direct supervisor, Andrew Brown, about that conversation and our efforts to investigate and corroborate the information that we got from the phone call. And we found nothing. We couldn't confirm the type of traffic that the FBI agent had mentioned on the phone. Question. Now, in addition to this blank marker, did the FBI blanked out marker, did the FBI agent mention anything about attribution? What group or entity might be behind this activity? Answer. If I remember correctly, in that phone call, he had mentioned that the adversaries that may be on our network were referred to as dukes, D-U-K-E-S. And we did. Me and my colleagues looked at any article we can find about dukes. And we found one. And one of the things I should mention that the FBI had requested was that if we do any investigation, we should do it in as stealthy a way as possible so that, in case his suspicions were proven to be true, that there were adversaries on our network, we wouldn't tip our hat to them. And so we did. So we looked at systems, at articles using systems that were not DNC systems or on the DNC network to read up on what the dukes were. We found one article, if I remember correctly, that was written by the Palo Alto Network, which is a cybersecurity firm. Well, cybersecurity, a technology firm specializing in cybersecurity in Palo Alto, and Mr. Elias. Conveniently have the Mr. Tamene. Exactly, yes. But we didn't find, so they had some markers for us to look through, and we did that as well in addition to what the FBI agent had recommended that we do. And so we looked at those items. We found nothing on our networks to suggest that what the FBI agent was suspecting were actually true. By blank. Question. So when you did some research for dukes, you mentioned you found at least one article. Did the article shed any light on who the dukes are or were? Answer. I don't believe it did. Again, this was 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly what the article stated, but I don't remember thinking that these are, Russians or some other entity. In that first read, we weren't actually looking for. Our aim was to find tools to assist us in corroborating the activities that the FBI agent had mentioned on the phone. Question. And I believe we've said that this call happened in September. Do you know or recall the particular date on which it occurred? Answer. I'm sorry, I do not recall. Question. So you mentioned that you talked to Andrew Brown about what you had done. Did he direct you to do anything, or what was his response? Answer. If I remember correctly, his response was, well, keep me posted about any findings that you have. And I did, and we had daily meetings, me along with other tech department leads. And in those meetings, I mentioned to him, and other meetings as well in person or over the phone, about our efforts, our findings, which were, unfortunately, none at this time. We didn't have any. And so the kinds of things we were doing was looking at it from a different perspective. Like, let's say we can't find this, blanked out, business. But let's see if we can find any activity that is untoward, unusual for the DNC traffic in general, right? And so we looked at those kinds of activities as well, and we found nothing that was sort of alarming or warranted further investigation. Question. Just to step back for a moment before we move forward in the timeline, had you previously, during your time at the DNC, received a call of this or similar nature from FBI, or was this the first time? Answer. This particular kind of phone call, me personally, Was my first time, yeah. Question. Were there other interactions you had with FBI that were similar? Or was this a sort of... Answer. Me personally, this was my first interaction with the, well, relative to cybersecurity and relative to the DNC, yes. Question. Were you aware of any other interactions, even if you weren't personally involved in them, between the FBI and the DNC relative to cybersecurity during your time there prior to September 2015? Answer. No, I was not aware of any. Question. So when you... This is going to be imperfect, but I sort of want to trace the sense of urgency. When you first got the call and when you hung up the phone, if you had to sort of rank your level of concern on a level in a 1 to 10, based on everything you're dealing with on a given day, how would you have rated your concern at that time? Answer. 10 being the highest. Is that what you're saying? Question. Yes, 10 being the highest. Answer. I would say, well, given that I had a moment of 10, I can actually compare that I think effectively. I think at that point, it was probably a 4 or 5. Question. Okay. Answer. And I, having found nothing to corroborate what the FBI had said, it didn't reduce my concern, because it's hard to prove a negative. Obviously, I understand. And so I couldn't, be definitive in saying there was nothing there, meaning we were not actually compromised. And in fact, it's hard, since you can't prove a negative. It's hard for anyone at any time to say we're not currently compromised, right? I'm not just talking about me or the DNC. I'm talking about anyone working in computer systems. And so I don't think my level of concern dropped from a 5 at all through this process. And in April, once we found evidence, it went up to a 10 and stayed there for a very long time. Questioner. I'll try not to make today another 10 moment. So after you got the phone call in September, you did some initial due diligence, didn't find anything, reported this lack of findings to your boss. But by your account, didn't forget all about it, remained at a concern level of 5. What was the next development in the story? Was it another phone call that you got from the FBI? Answer. So, yeah. So from September through February, the conversations that I had, so the level of engagement I had with the FBI consisted of the FBI agent, the same agent calling me or texting me at times, and I would respond back. And every conversation had to do with we've seen similar activity. My understanding from having spoken with him, I'm going to sort of break the timeline a little bit here to sort of make this make sense, is that the agent was speaking with other intelligence community agencies, and they were providing him information that was about 3 weeks or a month or so old. And so when he called in September, for instance, he was talking about activity that was witnessed by some intelligence community member, maybe in July, maybe in August. And then, so when we spoke again in October, it was following up on potentially new activity of similar nature of concern. Again, so the type of activity that he was being provided was the same in nature. So he wasn't raising the alarm any more than he had back in September. So that kept going through in October and November and December. And I took his calls. Every call I took, I redoubled my efforts with my team. Reported that to Andrew Brown and Dawn, PH, to look at, what ways we can help corroborate this activity. One of the things that we did exercise is that in December, one of the thoughts that we had, as I mentioned before, we were thinking about what other ways are there to assist the FBI's investigation or API's findings or curiosity. We were concerned that potentially maybe the firewall that we had in use was not capturing the types of logs that would help us definitively answer his question. So we looked into the Palo Alto firewall, partly because of our findings from what we found in the article in September. But that wasn't the only reason. And so we got financial, budgetary approval to proceed with the purchase, and we took ownership of that firewall in February. It took some time for it to be delivered, and so we brought it online in March, and what's called in transparency mode, which means it listens to traffic in and out of your network, but it doesn't apply policy. So we thought that installing a firewall is a rather involved process. You can break a lot of things. So we wanted to sort of make sure that we were doing it correctly without disrupting services at the DNC. So we put it in transparency mode, which would have sufficed in addressing what concerns we had about the firewall that we had in place not being adequate enough to find the logs potentially. Like we weren't sure about that. That's one of the things that we did. So December happens. And in January, the FBI agent and I decide to meet in person. And so we do. And I took with me 2 of my systems engineers to meet with him. And question, if I can just stop. No, this is all very good, but if I could, we'll stop there. Come back to it and then just try to fill in a little bit of make sure I understand everything that happened between September and January. Answer, sure. Question, so the first call was in September. You mentioned that there were repeated contacts between yourself and the FBI agent between September and when you finally met in January. Answer, correct. Blank, September of 2015. Mr. Tamene, correct. By blank. Question, do you recall or can you sort of estimate the number of contacts, phone calls, text messages? Answer, I don't know if I can. It wasn't daily or weekly by any means. I would say at least monthly. That's probably the best I can do. At least monthly. Question, and generally, when you received a call or a message, would you respond or reply? Answer. So I actually never got a situation where I think I might have gotten some missed calls from him, but I never called him myself directly. And that wasn't me trying to be coy or anything like that. It was simply a matter of timing. And so if I missed his call, he would call back and I would talk to him. I would take his call. I never, not answered the phone because he was calling me, anything like that. Question, And was it the same one individual that you had contact with during the time? Answer. In the time period you described, yes. Question. Between September and January? And you mentioned that you continued searching for but did not find any evidence of the threat vectors that he was referencing. Did you communicate back to him that you had not found what he had? Answer. Correct. Question. Asked you to look for... Answer. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Threat vector is probably not the right term I would use in this context. It's actually, we're looking at logs that capture web traffic, internet traffic, computer traffic between computer hosts, between the DNC network and the internet itself, and then back from the internet to the DNC. That was the scope of work that the FBI was asking for, right? So threat vector in particular here is not, I mean, to be sure, we did look at any threat vectors just in general to be sure, but that wasn't the kind of questions that the FBI was asking at that time. Question. Was it your impression during this time that the FBI was asking you to do them a favor, or they were trying to do you a favor, or both? I mean, can you describe for me what you thought was going on in terms of what was the objective of this information exchange as you understood it at the time? Answer. I wouldn't use the word favor in either direction, but I would say that the information that the FBI was providing honestly was frustrating in how redacted it was, I would say. But I was grateful that they were talking to us at all, obviously. You know, if you are responsible for a computer system and someone who, who's in the know, for instance, like the FBI would be in the know, tells you there's something wrong, you take that seriously, obviously. And I took it very seriously, and I don't know if I would characterize it as us doing the DNC doing the FBI a favor or the FBI doing the DNC a favor. I think it was someone saying that, there's something that I think you can help us with, and it would help you to help us with it. So I don't know if it's a favor per se. Question. During this time, September to January, were you keeping Andrew Brown apprised of your interactions with the FBI? Answer. Yes. And so, in keeping with what the FBI had requested in the first conversation that we had in September, I did not write down these things on DNC systems and/or email these things to Andrew Brown. Because, again, if what the FBI was saying was true, in the worst-case scenario, these adversaries could be on our network listening and watching all of these activities. And so I didn't want to tip our hat. And so all the conversations I had with Andrew Brown were either in person or over the phone. But I did. For every conversation that I had with the FBI, I informed him of that conversation. Question. And then, once you shared information with him, did you have any visibility into what he subsequently did with that information? Answer. Not at the time. I did not. No. Question. During this time period, September to January, did you do any more research on who the Dukes might be or who the identity of these actors were that you were looking for? Answer. Well, yes. My team did some investigations around the Dukes. Part of the problem is that the sort of nomenclature here is interesting here, or challenging. Dukes are referred to by other cybersecurity firms by other names. It turns out, in hindsight, Dukes are the same as APT-29. APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. And that's their sort of most common name now. But they have a lot of other names, including Cozy Bear, which is the name that we ended up using in April. So I can't remember which entity. I think Palo Alto may have referred to them as Dukes, and maybe one or two other firms, cybersecurity firms. Definitely the FBI referred to them as Dukes, and so it was hard for us. I didn't see the linkage between Dukes and AP29 at the time, and so that might have hindered our ability to sort of figure out what the signatures, what types of things to look for specifically. I did ask the FBI for any information they could provide towards that end. And after we met in person in February, did you want me to go that route or stop? Question. One last question on this time period. When did you first, it may or may not be about this time period, when did you first affiliate these actors, however named, as potentially being attributable to the Russian government? Answer. So the first. If I remember correctly, the first time the FBI agent mentioned Russia, I think was in a phone call I had with him in November of 2015. Question. So it would have been during this time period. Answer. Correct. But he didn't give me any more. He didn't say Russian state-sponsored actor. He said Russians in general. And, at least I don't remember him saying Russian state-sponsored actors. And I don't know if that would have made me more concerned or less concerned or equally concerned. Whether he threw in the word, quote, government-sponsored, quote, term or not. However, once we met in person in February, one of the things that he did was provide us with 4 or 5 sheets of paper that were cut, a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that was cut into pieces, so 4 or 5 strips stapled together. And there were 1 or 2 lines per page that were timestamps of the kind of activity that he had mentioned in September. The / and then there's a blank. Now the IP address and the actual web address was redacted. The only thing that was present was the / blank and the timestamp. But I should mention timestamp is usually helpful in sort of narrowing down when things happen, which we didn't have beforehand. I want to stress that, right? So that was huge for us. Still redacted, still limited, but great. Let's go see if you can find this information to corroborate what the FBI is telling us. And so we did. We went in and looked at our firewalls again. And in February, remember that, at this time, we had a new firewall, but we hadn't put it in place yet. So we were looking at the old firewall logs. And even if we had the new firewall, that firewall would not have had the opportunity to look at the timestamps that were in the past, correct? And so what we did was looked at the logs that we had, looked at timestamps. We expanded the timestamp. These were, if I remember correctly, December 2015 timestamps. So we looked in November through January to see if, just in case, time zones and whatever were different. And we didn't find anything to corroborate what those strips of paper had mentioned. Question. So let me just catch up on, make sure I have everything straight. So you made the decision to obtain a new firewall when? In January? Answer. No. I mean, we had, We had made the decision to obtain a new firewall months before. We were able to secure the funding, but get approval to spend the money in December of 2015. Question: and was the decision or desire to get a new firewall because of this specific incident or just a general desire to improve? Answer: a general desire to improve cybersecurity at the DNC. That's always the case. You want to improve your systems. You want to improve. I don't think it's unique to the DNC. You want to improve your posture, as the adversaries are improving their tactics to sort of compromising your systems. You want to be able to sort of meet them where they are, or be better than that. And so one of the things that we did, in 2013, we got a new firewall. And in 2015, we got a new firewall again. And I'm sure we'll get a new firewall, as soon as one is appropriate for the DNC.